Yeah, it's not enough to just have a leader who says, oh, we're going global. It really does happen at every level of a company because there's so many little facets to how you go global that have to be taken care of. You may say like, oh, this is a sales initiative. We just need to add revenue in these different countries. Well, what about your renewals people? And what about your customer support people? And what about the people who are doing collections? And what about people who are hiring, people who speak those languages? It actually affects every aspect of your business.
Legal, HR.
Oh, legal, HR, finance, like everybody is affected, everyone.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rambach.
Okay, B2B DM game, get ready for a great discussion. For all of you, those of you who have some ambition on actually growing and going global with your business, you're going to get the opportunity to learn how to expand your business internationally in record time. Because we have Natalie Kelly on the show with us today. Natalie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jim. Wonderful to be here.
Now, Natalie is the author of Take Your Company Global, The New Rules of International Expansion. And before we get into that, I think it would be helpful if you would share with the B2B DM gang just a little bit about your background and experience.
Sure. Thank you. So Natalie Kelly, I'm Chief Growth Officer at a company called Rebrandly, link management platform. And my background is actually in international. Since I was pretty young, I was always interested in learning other languages, talking to people in other countries, traveling abroad when I could, and finding out how to make more connections across the world. So that's kind of where my entire career has progressed. I've worked at HubSpot, a large CRM provider, large software company, very global in international roles for the last 8 years prior to joining Rebrandly, and did a lot of international work in other companies before that.
Thanks for sharing that. But I also have to say, what you just shared could cause a lot of people to pause because they're like, wait a minute, I don't have that background. Oh, wait a minute, I haven't gone around to all these different places to, kind of understand, the nuance. But you're saying, okay, that should not be a limiting belief of yours. And so if we start talking about, going global and going international in record time, you're like, okay, a lot of these myths, and barriers that oftentimes we put in place, you need to wipe that off the table because the game has totally changed.
Exactly. That's the whole point of this book, is to make it easier for companies to go global and to not be so afraid of it. And I talk in the book a lot about the fears that people have, about the fear of the unknown. And really, anybody who's an entrepreneur and is trying to build a business, they're not scared. They're not risk averse. They're individuals who want to take a risk and learn and grow and build something. The exciting part about international is, if you have a stable business or not in your home country, going global is kind of like doing that over and over in a new market every time. And it really keeps the thrill and the excitement of building a company alive. I think for companies, even after they feel like, okay, my business is growing, maybe it's even stagnating, I need to do something new. You could add a new product. You could, expand within your own country. Or maybe there's an untapped market out there in some other part of the world that you just don't even know about, with people who would love your products and services. So that's the excitement that I hope to infuse in the reader in this book, to get them excited about the prospects and not so fearful.
Well, and as you say that, a lot of times, in the book, you talk about old thinking versus new thinking in a lot of different places. And one of the things that you talk about is strategy and business strategy, and then separately looking at international strategy and all that. And what you say in the book is like, no. They're directly linked. It's all strategy.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like often international strategy is viewed as something separate. Like, oh, I'm going to add these products, I'm going to grow. And then over here, I'm going to see how I do that in another country. I believe companies, owners, founders, leaders should be thinking about this from the beginning. Okay, international is another lever for growth. It's not something I do outside of my core strategy to grow. It's a piece, it's part and parcel of that. So, you have choices. Do we want to lean into adding a new product or growing an existing product or service that we already have in our business? Or do we want to say, you know what, I think we have enough with the products we have. We just need a bigger audience. So where am I going to take it next? So that's something that I think a lot of people don't think about. They're thinking, oh, it might be easier for me to spin up another product, or in many cases, you can go into a market that has a lot of affinity with a market you're already in with the same product that you already have, which is harder, which takes more work. Sometimes it's actually easier to go international than it is to launch a whole new service or product. So that's the piece that I want people to understand when they read the book. This can be a core part of your strategy in general. It doesn't have to be an aside or a separate, secondary strategy to growth.
Well, one of the things that you also refer to is that we've essentially looked at digitizing a lot of pieces of our business, and just about every single company has a website. And you say, you know what? You've actually planted a seed already for international growth just by having a website, because it could be seen anywhere. So take advantage of it.
Yes. And increasingly, very small businesses that are just starting out, if I ask, well, where's your traffic coming from? Sometimes they don't even know. But if I ask them to look at their metrics, they're usually surprised that it's not all coming from their home country. And in fact, a large percentage might not be from their home country. In many cases, it's 30-40% that are already coming from outside their home market. Now, maybe they're not actively trying to monetize those people who are coming to their website. Maybe they haven't thought about how to reach them a little differently. Maybe they haven't made it easy for them to buy or pay on their website. But that doesn't mean that that's not something they could easily harness or could not easily harness and get more leverage out of. It's just a fact that most companies, most businesses, even my own blog that I just, set up within the first couple of months, I had traffic from India, traffic from the UK, traffic from Canada, traffic from all over, even though I'm based in the United States. What would stop me if I were selling something on it from selling in the same language that I'm already making the website available in, but just making it more possible to do that with other countries? It's something a lot of people are not consciously thinking about.
Well, and so what you've done is you've created a guide for businesses that seek, to actually go global in a very predictable, sustainable, and effective way. However, you say also that the realities is that no two international paths are exactly the same. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people think about international strategy, they just want a playbook that they can follow and that other companies have used. Like, oh, tell me which markets I should go into. Which are the best markets? Well, my answer is going to depend, and it sounds like a classic consulting answer, but it really depends on the specifics of the business. How are they selling that product? What does the product actually do? What's the value? Is that value proposition going to be the same in another country as it is in your home country where you originally started selling, if that's the path you chose? So yeah, every path is a little different. I have some examples in the book of various different types of companies of different sizes. One of the ones that I like that I think showcases this unique path aspect of going global is a company that's based in rural Ireland in Donegal. The very start of the book, I talk about this company called Lottie Dolls. They basically manufacture toys for children, dolls, smaller than a Barbie doll. They're kind of for smaller kids. And they essentially thought about this problem from day one of building their business and thought, okay, we know the toy market is a crowded market. Unlike a lot of markets, it doesn't grow every year because there's only a certain number of children and they age out of toys, after a few years. So how do we reach the maximum possible number of buyers? And so they actually decided to launch through Amazon so that they could reach as many markets as possible and sell through that channel. And so they purposely designed their packaging in a way that would minimize the need to translate it, very limited amount of text, mostly graphics, kind of like the IKEA model where they don't have a lot of text They do everything visually because it's a lot cheaper. They don't have to translate everything for every single country that they're in. The founder of that company, used that approach. And so their packaging was done in a way that was highly global friendly. Their approach to going to market through Amazon and through other online resellers was also very global friendly. So they were pretty much global from day one. And now almost 100% of their business is outside their home market. So it just goes to show every path is very unique. You wouldn't necessarily follow that path if you're launching that same business in the United States, for example. It's a much bigger country. You might be able to go kind of just sell around your local city because you have a big population, unlike Ireland, very small population. So yeah, there's a lot of differences depending on where you are, who you are, what your strong points are, how you're selling, what your goals are ultimately for your business. How fast do you need to grow? How much do you need to grow? What type of revenue do you want? There's just so many different variables that it makes it hard to give a single framework to everyone. So what I've done in the book is give categories of things to look at that you can think about to determine what your international strategy should be. It's not a cookie cutter checklist. It's a list of things to consider to put you on the right track.
So, I mean, a lot of it was, again, trying to focus in on that mind shift. That was, and also having these frameworks that people could follow. But if I'm sitting here, and even if I said that example, or the example that you just gave, I'm like, well, okay, I can understand that from a product company, but I'm B2B. I don't create toys,
Mm-hmm.
So how do I need to actually apply that to my situation?
Yeah. So if you're selling, for example, let's say you're selling a training program or something to businesses, you might have certain variables in your business that are dependent on how many trainers do I have available? Am I the only trainer? How many hours am I available per week to do this? What sorts of training materials do I have? And are they easy to adapt for another country or another language? So also, how many companies are there of the types of companies that I want to sell my training products to in each of these markets? Is it going to be easier or harder for me to do that in, say, a market where I know there's not much competition, or a market like the one I'm already in, where maybe there's a larger population of companies I can sell to, but I have a lot more competition? So often the competition aspect has to be looked at as well. There could be, for example, a very big market for something that you sell in, say, the Nordics, because it's very small populations. There probably won't be as many competitors there for certain types of B2B services, and everybody speaks English proficiently. So you wouldn't even have to adapt things to sell into those markets. Also, very robust economies, used to pay very high cost of living, not so price sensitive, so they won't be negotiating on price as much in those markets, for example. So kind of depends on what you're selling, how you're delivering it. Is it mostly human delivered? Is it a software product? Is it a digital product? All those things factor in. There's just a lot of complexity there, but I try to distill it down into buckets for people to think through in the book so that it doesn't seem so overwhelming.
Well, and it was helpful. So, like, for example, you talk about like the 5 rules, for successful international business expansion. So if you could kind of run through those 5 rules a little bit.
Yeah. So I think there's lots. Are you talking about the old rules and the new rules in the book?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have a whole section in here where I talk about the old rules and the new rules. This is actually in the first chapter. I have a lot of differences about how you used to go global in the past and how you should go global today. I think some of the biggest ones are, one that you already mentioned, international strategy follows corporate strategy, is the old way of thinking about it. And today, as we talked about, international strategy is inseparable from your overall business strategy. I think another big one is that in the past, companies used to create a domestic strategy and then tweak it for local markets. And today, what I advise is to recognize that your global strategy is actually the sum of many local strategies. So, you don't necessarily need to take what you've done in one country and replicate it in another, but instead think about, okay, what's my strategy going to be there and how might it be different Maybe it doesn't even need to be as complicated as what I do in my home market. Maybe it's actually something really simple. Maybe it's going through a reseller. Maybe it's something that's not such a heavy lift. Another one that I have in here is that a lot of times in the past, companies tended to think, well, we'll just become global later as we grow. And it was kind of the mindset that, we'll be domestic focused when we're smaller. And as we get bigger, then we will think about crossing into new markets, going across borders. But I think now it's really a very different focus, that you think about going international from day one. And you have to think about it, even if you say it's an intentional omission, that we're not going to intensify our presence right now in those countries. It's better to be prepared for it. And this shows up in little decisions. So for example, let's say that you're going to put a method for accepting payments on your website. Are you going to choose one that is really focused on the US market only and has US dollars? Maybe if you're not so sure when you're setting this up, it's better to choose one, even if it's a little bit more money, that can accept a lot of global payments. So just in case you end up attracting traffic from outside of your home market, you can capture that demand and you can convert and monetize some of that traffic. So that's an example of how, if you think global a little earlier, it will help you have more flexibility in your decisions to intensify in any market later. So those are a few of the rules that I think are kind of different now. I have a long list of them, but those are kind of some of the core ones.
One of the things that made sense to me when I started actually reviewing it, you're like, more now than had in any other point in time in our history, are there opportunities for us to leverage services that will allow us to be local in a particular organization. Even when we start talking about, hey, now I'm going to do something which you phrased, which is called market intensification. So let's think about that a little bit. I do have some sales that are in a particular area that's global. And so I actually apply the MARCA model, right?
Oh, nice.
So the MARCA model that you have in here is talking about, how do we actually make the decision, to do what you call market intensification. And so I'm going to have you explain what market intensification is. But the MARCA model is market availability, real-time analytics, and then customer addressability. So if you could, first of all, tell us, what is market intensification, and then help us and walk us through the MARCA model.
Yes. So the example you gave, Jim, in your own business is exactly that you have some business from another country and you want to grow it. So in the old rules of international expansion, people would think, oh, I want to set up a new business in that country. I want to travel there, hire somebody there, or go feet on the ground, find a reseller in that country. That's kind of the old way of doing things. International expansion, it implied entering a new market. Entering being a big heavy lift to set things up, probably expensive. But what you just mentioned, the example you're saying is like, oh, I already have some business in that market. Let's intensify my presence in that market and let's grow it. So the idea is I already have an anchor there. Let me see what else I can generate in terms of new business, growing accounts, making that presence bigger. So that's the core difference there. And then in the MARCA model, what we have in there in the book is simply a model that I've used for various different companies. I know a lot of companies I wrote about this in Harvard Business Review, and a lot of companies contacted me later to say they were using it to help plan their market intensification. And basically what it looks at is three things. And I just came up with the acronym MARCA to make it easier to remember. So MA is basically market availability. So how much market is there in a given geography for you? You could call this TAM, But I think TAM, total addressable market, can be a confusing term for a lot of people because you get into, well, is it serviceable addressable market? Is it TAM? Is it SAM? Is it SOM? We probably didn't need another acronym, but I thought at least I'll just make it 2 letters instead of 3. But MA is simply market availability, however you decide to classify it. So let's say you're selling to, I'm selling to accounting firms. How many accounting firms are there in my country versus the UK versus this next country versus, that's basically my market size. Maybe it's even more narrow than that. Maybe I sell to accounting firms that are 500 employees or less, and they use QuickBooks. That's my target market. That's who I sell to. I sell consulting to them. Then I look at these different countries and look, okay, who's using that tool in those markets? And that's my MA, that's my market availability. And I can measure it, I can score it, I can get a sense of it for the countries that I'm interested in intensifying in. So that's MA. That's usually where people stop. They look at just the size and they get excited about a country. There's all these accounting firms based in Japan. I'm going to Japan. Well, there's a lot more to Japan than just the MA or the size, the availability of a market. You also have to look at RA and CA. So RA is your real-time analytics, which is basically, do you have any data from those countries? Do you see any traffic? Do you see any leads coming in? Are you getting referrals? It doesn't have to be very complicated. It could also be, if you already have some customers there, what was the average sale price for those customers? How much did they pay versus your customers in this country? Use whatever data you have in the early days to get a sense of, I think there's, these real-time analytics are showing me some good data. I have some interest here. So that's another simple one. Can be as simple or complex as you want to make it. And then the last one, and in my opinion, the most important one, is CA, which stands for customer addressability. And customer addressability is really defining how easy or hard it will be for you to address the needs of customers in those markets. So in the example of Japan, okay, maybe they have a lot of those accounting firms, but can you speak the language? Are you going to be able to adapt to the time zone? Are you going to be able to travel there? How costly will it be to localize all the materials? Do you have a local person there who can deliver consulting? It starts to become obvious that it's probably too complex of a market to start out in. Or even if you have closed a few deals in that market, is that going to be sustainable, or did it cost you a fortune to do that? So you can look at some of that data, and some of that's the softer stuff of like, oh, there's a big time zone difference. Oh, there's a cultural gap. Oh, they can't even take this form of payment in Brazil that I would need to use with them, or whatever. So you start to just ask those basic questions of how easy or hard will it be for me to grow quickly in this market, if that's your goal, achieve your business goal. And so then you have 3 different angles that you can look at to figure out, is it worth it for me to go into this country or that? Common one for American companies is the UK versus Canada. Should I go, more into Canada, or should I go into the UK? And a lot of people, because they get excited, they're thinking, oh, let's go to Europe. And they forget Canada's right there. It's right above us in the US. And it's not so different. It's actually, the cost score is probably going to be really good for Canada. And maybe the MA score availability is going to be high as well, but maybe you don't have much experience with it. And so you don't have any real-time analytics yet. It could be that you're getting more interest from the UK for some random reason we don't know. But I encourage people to look at all 3 things before making a budgetary decision of where you're going to spend money to get payback from your investment in intensifying in a new market.
Well, and I want to hit on, because I kind of touched on it a moment ago, but the CA, the customer addressability, I would dare to say probably stops more organizations in their track than the other 2. Because they're like, well, I can't service it. I can't do this, but that's part of what you introduced in the book. You're like, you need pause, because there are more opportunities to enter into markets by utilizing other services, I mean, more than ever before. So you may be surprised. Maybe that's, your level of understanding of that, knowledge of that may be somewhat limited, and it could cause you to actually make customer addressability stop you in your tracks. And it's like, no, your initial investigation is not good enough. You need to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and that's very true because people think, oh, how am I going to hire in that market? Well, now you can hire people pretty easily through all these employer of record services that are out there. There's globalization partners, there's remote, there's loads of them now. You can easily hire someone if that's your barrier. You can also find local attorneys to help you. I mean, a lot of these services will help with the employment contract, they'll help with payroll, they'll help with benefits, they'll help with all that stuff, taxes. There's so many tools out there now. And then collecting online payments. There are tools like Stripe and, payment processors and, all kinds of currency, exchange, tools that you can implement easily to accept foreign payments and such. A lot of it is made easier. I won't lie and say that it's no longer a challenge because all of those things do add complexity to a business. And you do have to think about how you're moving money around and where you're collecting money from and taxes. And there's always a lot to think about when it comes to international that hits every single area of the business. So I don't want to try to make it sound like it's not hard because it is. There's always a challenge when you're trying to grow anything. You're going to have to put in the work and the time. But I do want people to know that it's not as hard as it used to be, and it's more accessible to smaller businesses than ever before.
Well, and so the other thing that you made quite clear is when you started talking about an organization that already has that aligned strategy, and the strategy is overall essentially a global one, even though I may be now, already doing business, from a local perspective, is that, your opportunity to actually expand into that market and the simplicity of it, while it does hit everything, you should not fear that it's going to make what you may have as an organization would be possibly already lean overtaxed. It's a lot easier than you think. Yes, it's difficult. However, the payback is massive. Because if other organizations aren't thinking, or they're thinking the old way, your growth opportunities are significantly greater than your competitors.
Exactly. And I've seen this time and time again where companies will decide to accelerate, intensify in a new market, and their competitors aren't really watching what they're doing. And suddenly they have more market share than anyone would have dreamt because they were able to flex, they were able to adapt, they were hungry to learn, and they weren't afraid of it. They were like, yeah, we know it's going to be tough, but it's worth it. So that's why the real-time analytics piece is important, because you can start to see some early signs. Because the way you go global is more gradual today and more incremental, you don't have to invest hugely to test a new market. And I always advise any business of any size, doesn't matter if you're a huge global corporation or a one-person business, talk to people in that country. Find out how things work. Ask them what the value is. Ask them what the value is of what your product offers. You will be surprised. It's often not the same. And in fact, maybe like if you're a consulting business or you have any sort of human delivered services, you'll be surprised that the value is very different from what you thought. I remember when I was in a consulting firm, we had a customer in India, and they are very price sensitive. Obviously, our pricing was very US based. And they didn't want to pay the subscription fees for access to the research that we had, but they were willing to spend way more than the average customer on strategy consulting. And they basically said, look, we can source research ourselves here, highly educated population with lots of access to technology. We can do our own research, but we need the strategy that you have based on experiences with customers in the US that we don't have here. So therefore we'll pay you, it was actually a huge amount. It was like 5 times as much as average for the consulting part and the strategy part, but the research, we don't value that as much. And it was the opposite in the US market. So just sometimes asking the question, what do you need? How can I help you? What do you value? What are you willing to pay the most for and the least for? These basic questions are important because they can help frame how you go to market in that new country, or even how you adapt something that you're already selling there that you could be monetizing hugely and you're not even aware of.
Okay, so if I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about, but I've been in operation here domestically in the US, and I've built up all of this legacy, right? Everything is geared towards me servicing the US market. How difficult would it be for an organization to actually essentially reboot to be able to now align their strategy and essentially move forward from there?
I would almost treat it like a new product entirely. Instead of thinking, I'm going to leverage all the stuff that I have, think of it maybe like I'm starting fresh and I want to know first what they need. And then how do I leverage some of the pieces I've already built? Because it may be that you don't have to build up everything that you already did. And in fact, it might be overkill for a different market. You might say, let's say you have a few products like a in-person delivered training, an online training, and a consulting package, like a bundle. And let's say that you decide, oh, the human delivered training is not what they value in that country because they've told me they really want the online training and they want the strategy consulting. But the human delivered training that I make the most money from in this market is not actually what they want in that market, but they do want the consulting, which I can deliver without having to get on a plane and go there. I can deliver it virtually. I can scale it through people that I train to deliver it. So, that's an example of just knowing which pieces need to be adapted and which things will get you the most value. Because it can be overwhelming if you think, oh, I spent 10 years building this up, 15, 20 years building this up. Now I have to just throw it all away. Well, no, it's not that you have to throw it away, but it's also not that you have to build it completely from scratch. It's almost like reproductizing something you already have, repackaging something you already have, and just relaunching kind of something. Reconfiguring is a good way to think about it. It's less overwhelming to think, oh, I could just take this piece and this piece. But the big mistake that companies often make is they think, I'm going to take all of it and adapt it all, or just throw it into this new market and see how it works. That might be overkill. It might be way too much work to do that when you could just say, oh, the only product that really makes sense for this market is the online training. So there we go. I launched it this way. That's all I'm going to do in that market for now. It's much easier to think about it that way, which is much more nuanced, but also gives you more flex.
Okay, so you talked about this from a perspective of being able to, of course, get the real-time analytics, but also really do a more effective job of understanding that whole localization piece. So I think if you could give a little bit more insight on what that really means, it'd be helpful.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times people think of localization as either one of two extremes. They think it's either translation, basically translating the content, or they think it's like completely adapting or completely changing everything about a product. The answer is it's kind of somewhere in the middle. I break it down in the book to help people understand this a little better, but really there are several processes associated with international expansion. The most visible one is international sales or international revenue growth. That's what you measure in terms of, your dollars or whatever currency you're in. Beneath that, there is localization, which in my mind is simply adapting the experience, adapting the customer experience and making sure that you're delivering the right experience for the right audience. That can be adapting the product itself, could be adapting, for different aspects of what the country needs, like the currency, units of measure, things like that. Could also be adapting the language. Within that or beneath that, we have translation, which really just means adapting the message. and putting it into another language sometimes, but not always. Sometimes you might just do it in the same language, but for a different variety of English, like Australian English or Canadian or British English. And then beneath that, you often have, if you're talking about a website or a digital product or an online product, you have internationalization, which means adapting the code to work in another country, to work in another market. And so that's another term that often gets misunderstood because people think internationalization means going international, but it actually really means adapting the code. And then the big one that kind of wraps them all together is globalization. And what that means is adapting your mindset and your framework to enable all those other things to happen. So essentially, you can't really localize anything at scale if you haven't adapted your underlying framework and your mindset to make it possible to localize things. So I know that's a lot, but those are kind of the core definitions of, the processes that you need to think about. Now, localization, often people think about their website. How do I localize my website? How do I localize some emails and some content? What I would suggest is, for most companies, you want to first think about your English-speaking markets if you're an English-speaking company, because you will learn so much just adapting things for another English-speaking market before you go into all the other languages. A lot of times people are like, oh, we're going to go into 10 languages at once, because they see Google Translate, they see tools online that they think, oh, now it's not a barrier. It's still a barrier. You still have to have humans involved to some degree to make sure that what the machines are putting out there is not going to misrepresent your brand or actually get you into trouble, because they're not perfect. They're very good, but those tools are still, every context is different and every situation is different. So I wouldn't trust, 100% machine translation for anything, for like mass communications or marketing, like packaging or anything like that for a physical product. You have to be careful with them still.
Yes. Okay. So, and part of, as we're going through and we're talking about all these things, you had mentioned something about organizational culture, and that you really have to take the approach to where this isn't just senior level decision making that's going on here. You have to look at it from an organizational perspective and say the organization at all levels is going global. Explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. It's not enough to just have a leader who says, oh, we're going global. It really does happen at every level of a company, because there's so many little facets to how you go global that have to be taken care of. You may say like, oh, this is a sales initiative. We just need to add revenue in these different countries. Well, what about your renewals people? And what about your customer support people? And what about the people who are doing collections? And what about people who are hiring, people who speak those languages? It actually affects every aspect of your business.
Legal, HR.
Oh, legal, HR, finance, like everybody is affected, everyone. And it's often the case that somebody will say, oh, we want to go into Germany. Let's hire a sales rep in Germany. And that's their first hire, is the sales rep. They haven't even thought about how are they going to do anything in German? And the funny thing is, it usually works out fine. The problem is companies are leaving money on the table when they do that, because they aren't thinking about how to make that first German sales rep successful long-term. They are thinking, let's just close some deals, add some clients, but they're not thinking about, okay, how do we help that rep? Are they going to sell the same way in that country? Do we even know what customers in Germany want? And if it's different, often they just say, here's our sales training, shadow some people in English, and you'll learn how to sell it. Yeah, you'll learn how to sell it to Americans. That's not how Germans buy. So really just asking those initial questions, doing a little bit more upfront market research is important. No entrepreneur likes it when I say that, or no growth-minded leader likes it when I say that, because they're like, oh, we've done enough research. We know they want us. We know so-and-so likes that market. He's worked there before. my board member, my investor, my CEO. You get that a lot where people are like, we've just made up our minds, we're doing it, and they don't want to slow down. The other thing is the opposite happens where it's like somebody at the company sees there's great potential in the market. And then people internally are like, oh no, we had a bad experience. Oh, we can't go there. Oh, it's too big, too scary, too far away. You get kind of both ends of the spectrum. You get the eager beavers who just want to go like now and won't wait for research. And then you get the others who are, come on, we have to drag them along because they just don't want to get on board. So it is a real challenge for a lot of companies, because even if you have leadership saying, we're going to do this, you get a mixed reaction from all kinds of people in different roles at a company.
Now, definitely legal will slow you down all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's their job.
Natalie Kelly, a lot of things for us to, rethink in regards to global expansion. And I appreciate you sharing that. How does the B2B DM gang get in touch with you?
You can find me on my blog. It's called borntobeglobal.com. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect with me there. And of course, you can find the book anywhere books are sold. And I always remind people you can order it through your library, your local independent bookstore, and of course, online, Amazon, etc. Lots of different ways to find the book and to get a copy. And hopefully it will help many of your listeners.
Natalie Kelly, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.